My name is Yvonne Sullivan. I am 69 years old. For most of my life, I was a wife, a mother, and a shadow. I spent 34 years building a home, raising a son, and supporting a husband whose success became the center of our world. People used to say I was the backbone of the family. I guess somewhere along the way, backbones became disposable. Today, I am sitting inside a glass conference room on the 32nd floor of the Morgan & Slate law firm in Manhattan. The air smells like polished wood and old money. Everything here is marble white and walnut brown. My coat is a thrift store beige. My shoes make no sound on the expensive floor. On the table lies a legal folder with a gold seal. It contains the last will and testament of my ex-husband, John Sullivan, founder of a luxury real estate empire. Net worth, $160 million. I do not care about the money. I came because my son told me to. Aaron sits across from me. 42 years old, tailored suit, metal watch, eyes cold. He leans back and crosses his arms, the way people do when they believe they are untouchable. The junior lawyer brings in water. Aaron waves him off and smirks at me. He whispers slowly, like savoring every word. "You get $15, Mom." He lets that sentence hang in the air, lets it slice. My hands tighten inside my lap. My thumb rubs against the small brass key I keep hidden in my coat pocket. It is the key to the first home John and I ever owned, a little fixer-upper in Ohio. We sanded the floors together. We painted the bedroom walls seafoam green when Aaron was born. Aaron knows nothing about that key. He knows nothing about the life that came before money swallowed everything. "You should be grateful," he continues. $15 is generous. Consider it closure. He is proud of this moment, proud of reducing me to a number. I look at the key again. For years, I believed silence was love. Today, silence is armor. The senior attorney clears his throat and begins reading the will. This is the last will and testament of John Patrick Sullivan. To my son, Aaron Sullivan, I leave control of Sullivan Properties and its assets. Aaron stretches, satisfied, as if the world just arranged itself beneath him. The attorney turns the page. "And to my former spouse, Yvonne Sullivan," Aaron interrupts him. "Just skip it, we already discussed this. She gets nothing." I watch the attorney's eyes move from the paper to Aaron, then to me. Per instructions, I must read every word. Aaron sighs dramatically and looks out the window, bored, as if my existence is an inconvenience. The attorney continues, "A cash gift in the amount of $15 shall be given to Yvonne Sullivan. This will be wired to her personal account within 30 days. Aaron smirks, triumphant. That line, that exact humiliation. It matches the thumbnail he rehearsed in his head. "You get $15, Mom." He mouths the words again, slowly, so only I can see. The room laughs, not loudly, but enough to let me know I am the punchline. My heart sweeps through 34 years at once, nursing him through fevers, staying awake while he studied, working night shifts because John refused to let me use family money for myself. My son is laughing at me, but I do not speak. I do not defend myself. Silence can be louder than screaming. The attorney flips to the final sealed document. He frowns, presses his glasses higher on his nose. "This is unusual," he murmurs. "There is a second document, a codicil, handwritten and filed 3 days before Mr. Sullivan's passing." Aaron straightens. "What codicil? There is no codicil. My father told me everything." The attorney breaks the seal. He reads, "To whom it may concern. If you are reading this, it means I finally understood the truth. I did not build my empire alone. The person who sacrificed the most for this family was not my son. It was my former wife." The attorney inhales, looks directly into my eyes. "All assets of the Sullivan estate, including investments, real properties, and controlling shares, totaling $160 million, are to be inherited by Yvonne Sullivan." The room falls silent. Aaron jerks forward. "What? No, that is not possible." His face turns white. His mouth opens. No words come out. My fingers rest on the brass key inside my pocket. For the first time in 20 years, I remember something. I was not invisible. I was never weak. I was the foundation. He just never noticed. I lift my chin, steady and calm. I do not need to say anything. The truth has spoken for me. When the lawyer read my name in that room, my mind did not stay there. It drifted back to the sound of hammers, to the scent of wet paint, to a time before marble tables and gold pens defined worth. It drifted to the beginning, to the small town where John and I once built something out of nothing. We were 23 and broke, but hopeful. John was ambitious, always sketching blueprints on the backs of receipts. I worked 2 jobs, mornings at the diner, nights at a small library. Every tip I saved went into a tin box marked home. The day we bought that little house on Elm Street, John handed me a small brass key. He said, "This is not just for doors, Yvonne, it's for everything we'll open together." The key was smooth then, bright and new. I held it like a promise. We painted the walls ourselves. We didn't own much, but laughter filled the gaps between the furniture. On Sundays, John made pancakes shaped like stars for Aaron, who was barely 5. I remember the way Aaron's giggle bounced off those green walls. John would look at us with a quiet smile and say, "We're going to make it, Vonnie." In those days, success felt like a faraway light, but we believed in walking toward it, hand in hand. John drew his first big contract on our kitchen table, using rulers and hope. I made coffee and listened to his ideas, every one of them wild and beautiful. When the company finally registered its first name, Sullivan Properties, I typed all the documents by candlelight. I didn't want him to see how proud I was, because pride was his thing, not mine. Aaron adored his father. He would sit on John's lap, tracing lines across the blueprints with tiny fingers, asking questions about buildings and skylines. When John looked at him, his eyes softened. "One day you'll build more than I ever could." And I believed it, because back then, we all believed in one another. The first decade was simple. I kept our finances balanced, answered calls, met clients when John was sick. No one knew I did those things. It didn't matter. I was his partner, not his rival. When the papers began calling John the architect of the American suburb, I clipped every article and kept them in a box. That box is still somewhere in my closet, filled with brittle clippings that smell like pride and old ink. We had dinners by the window, talking about how success would let Aaron choose any college he wanted. John's hands would rest over mine, rough but reassuring. "We'll never forget where we came from," he'd say. I used to believe people meant what they repeated, but as the houses got larger, our conversations got smaller. Clients replaced friends. Phones replaced laughter. And somewhere between the 4th and 5th real estate award, John began to forget my voice in his plans. Still, I stayed. I ironed his shirts. I managed the home. I smiled at parties, listening to investors praise his genius. No one mentioned the woman who filed the taxes, who caught the accounting errors, who learned to keep quiet when her ideas were dismissed with a smile. Aaron was a teenager then, 17 and restless. He would come home from school wearing his father's cologne, practicing his handshake in the mirror. I remember one afternoon, he walked into the kitchen while I was kneading dough and said, "Dad says if you're not chasing something, you're already losing." I laughed and told him, "Chasing is fine, sweetheart, but don't forget to breathe." He rolled his eyes. "That's what people without ambition say." It was the first time my son spoke to me like I was small. I didn't answer. I just pressed my hands deeper into the dough, shaping bread for dinner. That silence between us never healed. It only thickened. Years passed. John's company exploded across states. There were dinners with politicians, weekends at fundraisers. I still wore the same gold necklace John gave me when Aaron was born, though I noticed he stopped wearing his ring. He said it scratched when he typed. I nodded and went back to washing dishes. I kept that key with me, even when we moved into the penthouse. It no longer fit any door, but I couldn't throw it away. Sometimes I would hold it at night, running my thumb over the edges, reminding myself that I once mattered. John was brilliant, yes, but brilliance can be a kind of blindness. The more he built, the less he saw. Ambition became a storm, and I was the quiet shore he kept eroding without realizing it. When Aaron graduated from business school, John threw a party that made the front page of a magazine. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, clapping. The article called Aaron the heir to the Sullivan legacy. I wasn't mentioned. The photographer cropped me out. I remember standing by the buffet table watching my son give a speech about his father being his greatest inspiration. He didn't glance my way once. I drove home early, alone. In the car, the key was warm in my palm. I thought about how doors open and close without warning, how sometimes the thing that keeps you locked out is the same thing that once let you in. Still, I didn't resent them. I told myself this was what love looked like: sacrifice, patience, invisibility. I told myself that being silent was the way to keep a family whole. But silence has a weight. Over time, it presses on your ribs until you forget how to breathe. When I reached home that night, I unlocked the door and realized the irony. The house I had built, the life I had held together, no longer belonged to me. Even the walls seemed to listen to someone else's story now. And yet, I kept the key. Because it was proof that once, before ambition devoured tenderness, there was a man who believed in us, and a child who loved me for who I was. That key, heavy and dull now, still sits in my coat pocket. It has never failed to remind me that I built something real, even if the world forgot. By the time Aaron turned 20, the rhythm of our family had changed into something I no longer recognized. Our dinners were quieter, more formal. The table that once smelled like cinnamon and laughter now smelled like power, wine, steak, and the faint smoke of John's expensive cigars. The man I once painted walls with had become someone whose voice filled boardrooms, not living rooms. He still sat at the head of the table, but now he carried that invisible distance that power builds around a person. He spoke to clients more than he spoke to me. I learned to listen without being heard. Aaron had grown into a mirror of his father, sharp, ambitious, impatient. He was home from college that summer, full of new words like market leverage and brand image. He carried himself like someone who believed he was already successful, even before he had done anything. I tried to see the little boy he once was, the one who used to curl up beside me while I read, but it was hard. His eyes no longer searched for comfort. They searched for control. That night, we were having dinner to celebrate John closing a deal in Chicago. The dining room was all glass and silver, the kind of space that echoes your own breathing. Aaron poured wine for his father and barely looked at me. "Your mother was the lucky charm tonight," John said, half smiling at me. "She's always been good for my nerves." Aaron smirked. "Behind every great man, right?" John laughed, the deep, booming kind that used to make me feel safe, but now felt staged. "Exactly. She keeps the peace while the rest of us chase the storms." I smiled softly, trying to make it sound like affection, not irony. Someone has to keep the roof from blowing away. Aaron's fork clinked against his plate. "Mom, when are you going to do something for yourself?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've spent your whole life being someone's support system. Dad's secretary, Dad's housekeeper, my babysitter. Don't you ever want to be more than that?" John frowned slightly. "Aaron, your mother has done plenty. Don't start." But Aaron kept going, like he had been saving it. "No, I'm serious. Everyone in my class has mothers who run businesses, charities, or something. You could have done anything, Mom, but you just stayed home." His words landed like pebbles at first, small, dismissive, then heavier. "I stayed because someone needed to," I said quietly. Aaron leaned back, crossing his arms, the same way John did when he thought he was right. That's what people say when they're scared to risk anything. I felt John's eyes on me, waiting to see how I'd respond. He didn't defend me, he just watched. "I wasn't scared," I said. "I made choices for this family." Aaron shook his head. "You made sacrifices, Mom, not choices. There's a difference." John chuckled softly. "He's not wrong, Yvonne. You always played it safe." For a second, I couldn't breathe. The two people I had built my world around were sitting across from me, dissecting my life like it was an exhibit, something outdated, irrelevant. I looked at Aaron. "Is that how you see me? A woman who just gave things up?" He didn't hesitate. "You gave up ambition. That's why you don't have anything now. People who keep giving end up empty." John raised his glass. "It's a different generation, Vonnie. The world belongs to those who take, not those who wait." Aaron nodded, proud to echo him. "Exactly. Sacrifice doesn't build anything anymore. Ownership does." I stared at my plate. The steak had gone cold. There was a time when John's words were my compass. Now they felt like a verdict. I tried to smile, but my lips didn't obey. "I'm glad you both have it all figured out." Aaron leaned forward. "You don't have to take it personally. I'm just saying, maybe if you'd pushed harder, you wouldn't have to depend on anyone." I met his eyes, and for the first time, I saw no trace of the boy who once held my hand. "I don't depend on anyone," I said softly. He shrugged. "We'll see." The silence that followed was long and strange, the kind that changes something invisible inside a room. John cleared his throat and went back to his phone. Aaron checked his messages. I sat there listening to the ticking of the wall clock, wondering when a family becomes a performance instead of a bond. After dinner, I washed the dishes alone. The lights in the dining room reflected against the window, and for a moment, I saw our reflections. John pacing with his phone, Aaron typing something fast, me standing still. 3 people in one frame, none of us facing each other. That was the night I realized love can erode quietly, like paint fading from sun exposure. No argument, no betrayal, just slow disappearance. Later, when John came to bed, he kissed my forehead absently and said, "Don't take it to heart, Vonnie. He's just being honest. The boy's got to drive." I wanted to ask him if he remembered the girl he married, the one who had driven too, once. But the words stayed in my throat. When he turned off the light, I lay awake, staring into the dark. My hand found the small brass key on the nightstand. It was warm, shaped by decades of my fingers. I turned it over and over, listening to its tiny metallic sound in the silence. It used to unlock the door to our first home. Now it felt like it was locking something else inside me. A memory, a warning, maybe both. The next morning, Aaron left early for a business trip with John. He didn't say goodbye. He just called from the foyer. "Tell Rosa to send my laundry to the cleaners." I watched him go, tall and sure of himself, the same way John used to be when he was young. I should have been proud. Instead, I felt something in me fold inward, like a page turned too sharply. That afternoon, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and thought about what Aaron said. "You gave up ambition." Maybe he was right, in a way. I had spent my life watering everyone else's garden and never once planting my own. But I also knew something he didn't. Not every garden blooms loud enough for others to notice. Some grow quietly beneath the soil, waiting for the season when silence becomes strength. That was the night I stopped expecting John or Aaron to see me. I still loved them, but love doesn't mean blindness. From that moment, a thin crack formed between us. Not visible, not loud, but real. And like all fractures, it began small. Just one dinner, one sentence, one silence too long. Yet it was enough. Enough to start the slow collapse of everything I thought would last forever. The crack in our family didn't appear overnight. It spread quietly, like water seeping into wood, warping everything it touched. A few months after that dinner, the phone rang late one night. John was still at the office, and his voice sounded different. Strained, almost frightened. "Yvonne," he said, "I need you to come down here. Now." I threw on my coat and drove through the rain. The city shimmered with red taillights and wet asphalt, and I remember thinking how strange it was to hear fear in John's voice. When I arrived, the office was dark except for the conference room light. John stood by the window staring at the skyline like it was judging him. He didn't turn around. "We're in trouble," he said. "What kind of trouble?" He rubbed his temples. "Cash flow. The expansion projects bled us dry. If we don't find new capital in the next 2 weeks, Sullivan Properties will collapse." For a moment, I didn't understand. Collapse? That company was his life. Our life. What about the investors? I asked. They're panicking. Everyone's pulling out, and now... He hesitated, then looked at me with eyes I hadn't seen since our early years. The eyes of a man cornered. There's another group willing to help. They'll inject $20 million immediately, but there's a catch. He opened a folder. Inside were contracts written in legal language I barely recognized. I could feel the chill from the paper before I even touched it. What kind of catch? They're offshore, he said quietly. It's complicated. Money laundering disguised as capital transfer. They use shell companies to move funds through development projects. It's technically legal, well, partially. John, I whispered, that's not just risky, it's criminal. He sat down, his voice low. I know, but without it, everything collapses. The employees, the mortgages, the banks, everything goes down with me. With us. I looked at the blueprints pinned on the wall, the skyscrapers, the townhouses, the empire he had built brick by brick. I saw the boy who once promised me the world, now trapped by it. He buried his face in his hands. If I sign this, I could lose my license, my reputation, everything. And if you don't, then the company dies by Monday. He looked so small then, so fragile in that expensive suit. For a moment, I wanted to take his hand and tell him to let it fall, to let the empire go and start again, but I knew he couldn't. Men like John weren't built to start over. They were built to win, even when winning meant drowning. John, I said softly, let me sign it. His head shot up. What? Use my name. I'll be the legal representative for the subsidiary. You can keep your record clean. The investors won't know the difference. He stared at me, disbelief flashing across his face. You do that? I'm already invisible in this company, I said. Let me at least make it mean something. He hesitated. Yvonne, this could ruin you. I smiled faintly. You said once I play it too safe. Maybe it's time I don't. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Rain hammered against the glass. Finally, he slid the papers toward me. I signed my name at the bottom. 3 signatures, black ink, my hand steady. That night, I became the legal owner of 5 shell companies designed to funnel foreign capital through construction projects. I didn't fully understand the magnitude of what I had done. I just knew that it saved him, saved everything. By Monday, the news broke that Sullivan Properties had received a miraculous injection of funding. Articles called it a strategic revival. Investors cheered. John became a genius again. I watched him on TV, shaking hands with bankers, smiling under the lights. No one mentioned my name. Weeks turned into months. The money flowed. The company stabilized. I thought maybe the danger had passed, but silence has a way of turning into suspense. One afternoon, I came home to find John pacing in the living room, pale as paper. The feds are investigating the capital source, he said. They're tracing every name connected to the transfers. And my name? I asked. He looked at me, unable to answer. It was my name on every document, every offshore entity, every digital trail. The company was clean. I wasn't. Maybe we can fix this, I said, though I already knew we couldn't. He shook his head. If they find out, the company is finished. I'll lose everything. Something in me broke quietly then. Not anger, not regret, just understanding. I saw the full shape of my role in his life, the safety net he could sacrifice without consequence. It's all right, I said. If they call, I'll tell them it was my decision. You didn't know. He closed his eyes. Yvonne, you don't have to do that. But I already had. A week later, federal auditors came to the office. They asked questions. They took copies of the documents. I answered everything politely, like I was giving a cooking recipe. I didn't flinch when they implied misconduct. I said the funds were sourced through my consulting partners and that John was unaware. They wrote it down. They thanked me. They left. When I returned home, John was waiting. They believe you, he said. They said it looks like you acted independently. I nodded. Good. He touched my shoulder. You saved the company." "I saved you," I corrected. He didn't answer. For a few weeks, we lived in the aftershock. The papers praised his leadership again. The investigation closed quietly. And I faded further into the wallpaper of his life. Aaron never knew. He was busy launching his own venture, funded by John's company. To him, I was just the quiet mother who baked and smiled at events. No one asked me what it felt like to sign those papers. No one asked why I did it. Maybe they didn't want to know. I kept the key in my pocket through it all. Sometimes I'd run my thumb over it, thinking about that first house on Elm Street. Back then, the key opened a door to something hopeful. Now, it was just metal proof that I had once believed in love more than logic. The following winter, I was called to testify in a closed audit review. They found discrepancies, minor ones, but enough to warrant questions. John's lawyer suggested I appear confused if asked about the shell corporations. I did. I played the part perfectly. The harmless wife, naive and cooperative. They dropped the case. That night, John opened a bottle of champagne. "To us," he said, handing me a glass. "To survive." I looked at him, the man whose empire stood tall in my silence. I raised my glass but didn't drink. "Survival," I echoed. Later, alone, I sat on the balcony and watched the city lights flicker like embers. For the first time, I realized that my silence had become currency. The more I gave, the richer he grew, and in that trade, something inside me, some quiet, sacred part, had gone bankrupt. No one would ever know. No one would ever ask. And if they did, I would smile, the way I always did, and say, "It's fine," because that was my role. The invisible shield, the ghost that kept the empire standing, the truth stayed buried under my name, until the day it decided to rise again. The storm didn't hit all at once. It came in whispers first. Articles, rumors, fragments of doubt moving through boardrooms and coffee shops. Someone leaked that Sullivan Properties funding had questionable origins. My name appeared in small print, underlined in red ink on a financial blog. Yvonne Sullivan, former homemaker turned shadow investor. At first, John told me not to worry. "It's just noise," he said. "The press needs a distraction." But within days, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters waited outside our building. Clients wanted explanations. The same executives who once toasted to his brilliance now avoided his calls. When people are afraid, they look for a name to blame, and mine was already signed on every document. One evening, John came home with 2 glasses of whiskey. He didn't hand me one. He just stood there, the city behind him, glowing like fire through the glass. "They're not letting this go," he said. "If the story grows, it could take down the company." I waited for him to say, "We'll face it together." Instead, he said, "We need to separate the damage." I stared at him. "The damage?" He sighed like he was explaining something to a child. "If the narrative becomes that you acted independently, that you overstepped, the company can survive. I can protect our son's future." "John, I did this for you." He looked at me then, but his eyes were hard. "You shouldn't have. You signed things you didn't understand. You jeopardized everything I built." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I thought I'd misheard. "You asked me to," I whispered. He turned away. "There's no proof of that." My mouth went dry. "You're letting me take the fall." He didn't answer. He walked to his study and closed the door. The sound of the latch felt heavier than any slam. A few days later, I saw the headline, "Sullivan Properties distances itself from founders. Ex-wife amid financial probe." There was my photograph, me leaving the courthouse in a gray coat, my face blurred by wind. They called me reckless, naive, a liability. Aaron came to the apartment that night, furious. "What did you do, Mom?" "I did what your father asked me to do." He laughed bitterly. "Dad said you went behind his back. You created fake companies. Do you know how much trouble you've caused?" My hands shook. "Aaron, that's not the truth." "Then why is your name on the documents? Why is Dad the one cleaning up your mess?" "Because someone had to take it," I said quietly. He threw his hands up. That's your excuse for everything. You take, you absorb, you let people walk all over you, and then you call it love. I wanted to tell him everything, that his father begged me, that I did it to protect them both. But one look at his face told me it wouldn't matter. He had already chosen which story to believe. Do you really think your father would ask me to do something illegal? I asked. Aaron's jaw tightened. You're jealous of his success. You've always been. Jealous. That word lodged in my throat like glass. He stepped closer. You could have stayed out of it, but you had to make it about you, and now everyone's paying the price. I looked at him, the same sharp nose, the same eyes as his father, and realized I'd lost both of them in one choice. Aaron, I said, when you were little, you used to hide behind me whenever you were scared. Do you remember that? He blinked, irritated. What does that have to do with anything? Back then, I protected you from monsters you could see. I guess I never realized the real ones would wear familiar faces. He frowned, confused. I didn't clarify. Some truths are too cruel to say out loud. The next morning, John called me into his office. His lawyer was there, sitting straight with a folder in front of him. We're filing for divorce, John said. His voice was even, practiced. It's the best way to contain this. I looked at the man who once danced with me in our kitchen, whose shoulders used to carry the weight of our dreams. Now his words sounded like a press release. I'll make sure you're taken care of, he added. The settlement will be fair. Fair. The word felt obscene. You think money can fix what you're doing? He sighed. Don't make this harder than it has to be. You've done enough damage. Say it, I said. Say that I saved you. He looked at me for a long time, then said, You saved yourself. That was the last honest thing he ever said to me. A week later, the divorce was finalized quietly, behind closed doors. The headlines shifted to another scandal, another name. But within our world, the story stuck. People whispered that I was unstable, greedy, and uneducated. I lost friends I'd known for 30 years. Invitations stopped coming. Even the charity I volunteered for asked me to take a break until things settle. I moved out of the penthouse. The key in my pocket was the only thing that came with me. It had stopped opening doors long ago, but I couldn't let it go. The day I left, Aaron helped his father pack my boxes. He didn't say goodbye. He just stood by the elevator, arms crossed, eyes dry. I wanted to hug him, to tell him someday he'd understand, but I knew that day might never come. When the elevator doors closed, I saw my reflection in the metal panel. A woman who had given her name, her loyalty, and her silence to protect the people she loved, only to become the villain in their story. For the first time in years, I cried, not from anger, but from the weight of being erased. Outside, the wind cut through my coat as I stepped into the street. I didn't have a driver or a destination, just a small suitcase and that brass key pressing against my palm. It was almost poetic in a way. I had built a kingdom of glass for two men who couldn't see me standing inside it. Now all that glass had shattered, and yet, as painful as it was, there was a strange kind of peace in the ruin, because once everything breaks, there's nothing left to lose. I used to believe that silence meant peace, but silence, when it lasts long enough, becomes something else entirely. It becomes a room you can't escape, no matter how many doors you build. 20 years have passed. The city moved on. John remarried a younger woman whose name I only ever saw in magazines. Aaron built a reputation as a shrewd businessman. He had a family of his own now, 2 children I had never met. I learned about their birthdays from newspaper features and holiday cards that never came my way. As for me, I lived in a small rented house by the coast, 3 hours from the city. It wasn't much, 2 rooms, faded curtains, a creaky porch, but it was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't demand answers. Every morning I made tea and sat under the roofed porch, watching the sea mist roll over the dunes. The air smelled of salt and memory. Sometimes, when the light hit just right, the brass key in my pocket glinted like gold, as if reminding me I once opened more than doors. I had become a ghost of my own story, alive, breathing, but unseen. People in town knew me as the quiet widow who rented the Whitaker cottage. They waved politely, asked nothing, and I gave them exactly what they expected. Small smiles, simple answers, nothing that hinted at the empire I once built and lost. In those early years, I worked part-time at the local library. I liked the order of things there. Books lined up neatly, each story exactly where it belonged. It felt like control, something I hadn't had in decades. I never mentioned my past. The name Sullivan didn't exist here. Every now and then, I'd receive an envelope forwarded from the old address. Most were legal, forms or charity mailers. But once I got a letter from Aaron's assistant, an invitation to the company's anniversary gala. I tore it in half before finishing the first line. They wanted me as a prop for forgiveness, not as a person. That night, I ate dinner alone, baked potatoes and leftover soup, while the radio hummed an old jazz tune. I watched the steam rise from my plate and thought about how easy it is for life to shrink without anyone noticing. The house creaked with wind. My only company was the clock on the wall and the rhythmic sound of the ocean hitting the shore. There is a loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being forgotten by the ones you kept alive. Sometimes I would whisper Aaron's name into the air just to remember what it felt like to speak it. It was during one of those gray afternoons that I met Grace Whitaker again. She had been my neighbor years ago, back when John and I still lived on Elm Street. She'd gone on to become a lawyer, a good one by all accounts, and now fate had circled her back to this coastal town to care for her aging mother. She spotted me outside the market one morning, holding a bag of groceries. "Yvonne Sullivan?" she asked, her voice uncertain but warm. I froze. It had been years since anyone said that name aloud. "Just Yvonne now," I said, with a small smile. She studied me for a moment, then her eyes softened. "You haven't changed much." "That's what people say when they mean I look tired," I said, half laughing. She smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe you're just one of those people time can't erase." We sat on a bench near the pier, talking about the past as the gulls wheeled above us. She told me she'd followed the Sullivan case back then, how she'd always suspected there was more to it. "The narrative never made sense," she said. "A woman with no background suddenly manages offshore accounts? That wasn't incompetence. It was sacrifice." I looked down at my hands, the lines deeper now, the skin thinner. It doesn't matter anymore. They needed someone to blame. I fit. Grace shook her head. "It matters. The truth always matters, even if it's late." She became the only person who ever visited. Sometimes she'd bring lemon cake or a bottle of cheap wine, and we'd sit on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the fog settle. She'd tell me about her cases, about the injustice she saw daily. "People think silence equals guilt," she once said, "but sometimes silence is just self-defense." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She already knew. One evening, when the sunset spilled gold over the water, she noticed the small brass key I kept beside my teacup. "That's not just a key, is it?" she asked gently. "No," I said. "It's a memory that refuses to rust." She smiled sadly. "Then keep it polished." As years went by, Grace became my mirror, the person who reminded me I still existed. She never pitied me. She simply saw me. And being seen after so long in the dark felt like light returning to old rooms. We never talked about John or Aaron unless she brought up something she'd read. "Your son's company went public last year," she told me once. "He's quite the mogul." I nodded. "He always wanted to be his father." "And you?" she asked. "What did you want to be?" For a long moment, I couldn't answer. Then I said, "Visible." That word hung in the air between us. Grace reached over and squeezed my hand. "You still are," she said, "more than you know." But most nights, after she left, the loneliness returned. I'd light a candle, sit by the window, and imagine the sound of Aaron's voice calling me Mom. Sometimes I'd dream of him as a boy again, mud on his shoes, sunlight in his hair, asking me to read one more story before bed. Then I'd wake to the hollow quiet of the house, the kettle clicking off, the waves murmuring outside. It's strange how grief doesn't age. It just changes its rhythm. Some days it whispers. Some days it roars. On my 69th birthday, Grace brought flowers and an envelope. Inside was a clipping from a financial magazine, a photo of John's grave and a short article about his estate. "He passed last month," she said softly. I stared at the photo, at the cold marble engraved with his name. There was no mention of me, no acknowledgement, just legacy and numbers. Grace hesitated. "I'm sorry. I thought you'd want to know." I nodded. I did. I just didn't think I'd still care. That night, I sat on the porch long after she left. The wind was cold, but the stars were bright. I held the brass key in my hand and whispered to the dark, "You can't erase a person by pretending she never existed." And for the first time in years, the silence didn't answer back. It happened on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, the kind that starts quiet and harmless before it rearranges everything you thought you knew. The sky was pale gray, the kind of color that drains the edges of the world. I was folding laundry when the phone rang. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but I knew before answering who it would be. Some things you feel in your bones. "Hello? Mother?" The voice was colder than I remembered, sharper. It wasn't the tone of a son calling his mother. It was the voice of a man conducting business. "Aaron?" I said softly. "It's been a while." "Let's skip the small talk," he replied. "I'm calling about the will." For a moment, I didn't understand. "Will?" "Dad's," he said flatly. "He passed away 6 weeks ago. You probably saw it online." I hadn't. Grace had told me about John's death, but I hadn't looked for the details. Grief, when it comes this late, doesn't bring tears. It brings silence. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it, though not in the way he expected. "I'm not," he said. He was tired. "The company's mine now. But before we move on, there's the legal stuff. The reading of the will is next Tuesday at Morgan and Slate." He paused, letting the name sink in, the same law firm that once hid my signature under John's. "You'll need to be there," he continued. There was no warmth, no trace of the boy who once called me Mommy, only command. "Why do I need to be there?" I asked. His tone turned impatient. "Because it's required. Dad wanted it that way." I hesitated. "I thought the two of you had already divided everything." He gave a short laugh. "Oh, we did. Don't worry, you're not getting anything. In fact, that's why I'm calling. I want you to hear it for yourself. I want you sitting there when the lawyer reads the part where Dad officially states you're entitled to nothing." He said the word nothing like it was a weapon. I stayed silent. He misread that silence as weakness, the way people often do. "Think of it as closure," he said. "You can finally stop pretending you were ever part of this family." I looked out the window at the ocean, waves rolling in, slow and endless. The sky had turned a deeper gray. I could hear the faint echo of wind against the glass, like something ancient breathing. "Are you still there?" he asked. "I'm here," I said. "Good, be on time. 11 a.m. sharp. Don't embarrass yourself." I almost laughed. Embarrass me. As if my existence had been one long performance meant to shame him. He continued talking, words spilling out, about the lawyers, about the media coverage, about how it was all procedural. But under it all, I could hear the truth. He wanted to see me defeated, small, erased again in public. He wanted control, the way John once did. I said nothing. When he finally noticed my silence, he snapped, "Are you listening to me?" "I am." "Then say something." I took a breath, steady and quiet. "I'll be there." 3 words. That was all. The line went silent for a second. Then he scoffed. "Fine. Just don't make a scene. This isn't about you anymore." He hung up. The dial tone hummed like a flat heartbeat. I set the phone down on the table and stood there for a long time, the sound of the ocean faint beyond the walls. Grace stopped by later that evening. I told her about the call. She listened without interrupting, her brow furrowed the way it did when she was weighing words like evidence. "You're going?" she asked. "Yes." "Why? You know what this is. He just wants to humiliate you again." I nodded. "Maybe. But there's a difference between humiliation and truth. I can live with one of them. Grace studied me for a long time. You're not going there for closure, are you? No, I said quietly. I'm going to remember who I am when no one else does. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, the brass key warm in my palm. I turned it over, feeling every dent, every ridge. That key had survived everything, fires, moves, even the years of silence. I thought about the house it once opened, the walls we painted seafoam green, the nights when Aaron fell asleep to the sound of my humming. I wondered when love had turned into a ledger. At dawn, the horizon split open with light. The sea shimmered gold for a moment, then gray again. I decided to wear the same beige coat I'd worn to John's court hearing 20 years ago. Some symbols are worth repeating. Grace insisted on driving me to the city. You shouldn't go alone, she said. The drive was quiet. She talked about her cases. I stared out the window at the blur of towns and trees, each mile peeling away another layer of the past. When we arrived at the city, the skyline cut through the fog like an old scar. The Morgan and Slate building stood tall, sterile, familiar. I hadn't been there since the night John handed me the papers that ruined my name. As we parked, Grace touched my hand. You don't have to prove anything, she said softly. I know, I replied, but sometimes silence doesn't surrender. It's strategy. Inside the lobby, everything gleamed. Marble floors, gold elevators, polished glass. I could see my reflection everywhere but didn't quite recognize it. Grace spoke with the receptionist while I stood by the window. Across the street, a billboard displayed Aaron's face, confident, powerful, his father's jawline stamped on a younger man. The tagline beneath read, Integrity, Legacy, Leadership. I almost smiled. The irony was almost poetic. The receptionist handed me a visitor badge. Mr. Sullivan is already upstairs, she said. I pinned the badge to my coat and followed Grace into the elevator. The ride felt longer than it was, the soft hum of the machinery echoing the pulse in my chest. As the doors opened to the 32nd floor, I caught a faint whiff of the same cologne John used to wear, the scent of control, ambition, and distance. Grace whispered, You can still walk away. I shook my head. No, it's time. The doors to the conference room were open. I could hear Aaron's voice, confident and commanding as he greeted the lawyers. I stepped inside. He turned, surprised, his smirk faltering for just a second. Mother, he said, almost as if the word tasted wrong. You came. I said I would, I replied. He studied me, searching for something. Fear, regret, weakness. But I gave him nothing. For the first time, my silence wasn't a wound. It was armor. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this would be the last time I'd ever let anyone mistake my quiet for surrender. The revolving door exhaled cold air as I stepped into Morgan and Slate. Light lived in that lobby. It pooled across the white marble, climbed the brass railings, and settled into the chandelier like it had been trained to obey. My footsteps made a hollow click that sounded too loud for a place where money preferred whispers. I paused just inside, letting the warmth touch my cheeks. The coat I chose was beige and serviceable. It had outlasted fashions and seasons. I smoothed the lapel with 2 fingers, then tucked my hand back into the pocket where the small brass key waited, warm against my palm. I felt its edges, steady, familiar, indifferent to the shine around me. Grace walked half a step behind, eyes scanning the room like a quiet bodyguard. She did not dress to impress. She dressed to be taken seriously. Charcoal suit, sensible shoes, a leather portfolio that did not try to look expensive. Her presence steadied me in a way words could not. A receptionist looked up from behind a slab of veined stone that might have been quarried from a glacier. She had the posture of a ballet dancer and the voice of a museum guide. Good morning, may I help you? I moved forward. Yvonne Sullivan, here for the reading of John Sullivan's will. Her smile flickered, brief and dutiful. Her eyes traveled from my shoes to my coat to my hair. They made a small decision as they landed. One moment. She pressed a button on a headset that curved along her cheek like jewelry. Client present for the Sullivan matter. She paused to listen. Her lashes did not blink. Yes, understood. She set a clipboard on the counter without sliding it toward me. Sign in. There is a visitor badge. The pen was heavier than it needed to be. I wrote my name in a slow hand. My signature looked like an old road, cracked and legible. Grace added hers beneath mine. The receptionist took the board back with 2 fingers, then retrieved a plastic rectangle. She pinned the badge to my coat for me, careful to avoid touching the fabric more than necessary. Elevators to your right, she said. 32nd floors. Conference A. She smiled again, brighter than before. Mr. Sullivan is already upstairs. Somewhere behind the desk, water fell through a concealed fountain. The sound mimicked calm. A pair of men in navy suits crossed the lobby without looking at anything, as if the building had been drawn around their schedule. Another woman, folded into silk and perfume, perched on a sofa beneath an abstract painting the size of a billboard. She watched me with the cool interest people reserve for weather. I adjusted my scarf and felt the coat pull at the shoulder seam that I had mended by hand. The stitch held. The working thread had a way of telling the truth. It either kept faith or it failed with a small, honest snap. Grace moved toward the elevators. I followed. The doors opened without a sound. Inside, the panel glowed in a column of numbers. She pressed 32. The doors closed. Our reflections layered across the steel walls like strangers on a train. The elevator rose with the confidence of something that had never stopped for anyone. Floor lights blinked in a disciplined rhythm. At 14, a young associate stepped in, smelled like citrus and ambition, glanced at my badge, then at my shoes. He performed a quiet calculation and turned his face to the doors. At 28, he stepped out and straightened his tie in the dark shine of the jam. When we reached 32, the doors parted to a corridor hushed like a library. The carpet disguised footsteps. The lights favored the artwork. The glass favored itself. Conference A waited at the far end, its door propped open by a brass wedge. A receptionist station sat nearby, this one staffed by a man with perfect hair and a tie that matched the firm's logo. He lifted a hand in a courteous half-wave that stopped short of welcome. "Miss Sullivan," he said, reading the badge before he saw my face. "Right this way." He led us past framed photographs of partners posing with famous clients, white smiles under stage lighting, hands gripping fountain pens as if the weight of ink could ensure history. The air carried a note of lemon oil and old books. Another smell hovered beneath it. Money has a scent when it gathers in rooms like these, something metallic and faintly sweet. Conference A was all table and window. The table reflected the skyline in an obedient sheen. The windows offered a view of a building so close it felt like a mirror held by a stranger. A glass carafe sat at the center on a silver tray. Ice had begun to fog the sides. Tumblers waited in a line as neat as soldiers. Aaron stood near the head of the table, laughing at something a man in a blue suit had said. He wore success like a tailored coat. It fit because he had made it fit. When he turned, his eyes touched me and slid away in the same motion, like the glance you give a photograph in a hallway you do not plan to walk again. "Mother," he said. The word arrived without temperature. "You made it." I nodded. Grace took a chair against the wall and placed her portfolio on her lap. She greeted no one. She watched everyone. I did not sit still. I stood at the far end of the table and took the room in slowly. The carpet had a pattern of pale geometry meant to suggest discretion. The chairs had the quiet arrogance of perfect upholstery. A small clock, analog and precise, murmured at the corner near a fern too glossy to be anything other than a contract with a florist. A junior associate entered carrying a stack of folders secure with a red cord. He placed them near the head of the table and left with the silent efficiency of a useful ghost. Behind him, a woman from catering appeared, arranged a plate of thin cookies, then retreated. No crumbs fell. The tray did not smudge. The senior lawyer entered last. He wore a gray suit that did not announce price. It announced permanence. His hair had surrendered to silver without negotiation. He nodded to the room, then to me, a fraction deeper. "Miss Sullivan." I answered with a quiet, "Good morning," and finally took my seat. The chair embraced posture rather than people. I placed my hands on my knees. The brass key pressed against my leg through the fabric, a small dot of certainty. Across the table, Aaron checked his watch. His cuff revealed a slice of gold. He did not look at me again. The man in the blue suit whispered something. Aaron's mouth tilted in a knowing line. They shared an audience that did not include me. A paralegal distributed a single page to each participant. The paper was heavy enough to be heard when it landed. I read the header without moving my lips. The firm's seal stared back with embossed clarity. A young woman from the firm took a seat near the door with a laptop balanced on her knees. Her fingers hovered, ready to record the afternoon with the speed and accuracy of someone who believed in transcripts more than memories. The senior lawyer opened a leather binder. He did not clear his throat. He did not announce himself. He simply began the way elevators move when no one is watching. "Thank you for coming. We will proceed as scheduled." His voice folded around the room like a measured tide. He named the case, the date, and the witnesses. He adjusted his glasses with a motion that spoke of habit rather than emphasis. As he spoke, I felt the weight I had carried for 2 decades arranged itself, not heavier, not lighter, just organized. I smoothed my coat again with 2 fingers. The seam held, the key held, my breath held. No one in that room knew the sound of a small kitchen where a boy once asked for one more story. No one knew the smell of paint drying on the first house. They knew ledgers and clauses. They knew how to make meaning stand still. I did not correct them. I let the room be what it was. I let myself be who I was. The receptionist's gaze had told me how I looked when I walked in. A woman out of place, a note in the wrong key. But sitting there, palms dry, spine straight, I recognized the truth the lobby could not measure. I was small. I was seen. I was steady. The lawyer turned a page. Light pooled across the table. The room paused as if it had to remember how to breathe. "Let us begin," he said. The key in my pocket warmed against my skin like a promise that had never needed witnesses. The senior lawyer adjusted his glasses and began with the voice of a cathedral bell, steady and ceremonial. He read the preamble, the date, the witnesses, the statement that John Sullivan had been of sound mind and intention. Paper whispered as he turned a page. Somewhere behind me, the HVAC sighed like a careful audience member. "First," he said, "the estate directs that all just debts, taxes, and funeral expenses be paid." The room did not react. Money likes its obligations tidy. Second, a bequest of $50,000 to Mrs. Howard, longtime housekeeper, in gratitude for loyalty. A young associate typed. The words. The keys clicked as if blessing the sum. I felt my pulse in my fingertips. I placed both hands flat on my knees. The brass key pressed a small circle of warmth through the coat. Third, he continued, donations to the Lighthouse Fund for Homeless Youth and to the Metropolitan Arts Education Program. He named the amounts. Someone near Aaron murmured, "Generous in the way people are when money is not theirs." I saw Aaron's jaw tense and release, a boxer's rhythm of patience. Sienna Vale, his polished companion, crossed one leg over the other and leaned toward him, amused and hungry for the main dish. "Fourth," the lawyer said, "a Rolex Submariner to Mr. Robert Evans, driver and security aide." Aaron rolled his eyes. Sienna smothered a laugh with the back of her hand. Mark Elgin, the colleague with the blue tie, flashed a grin. Small gifts, warm-ups, the overture before the lights dim. The lawyer lifted his gaze. "We now move to the distribution of certain personal effects." He read stock phrases. He did not look at me. He did not look at Aaron. He was the riverbed. The words were the river. When he finally turned to a tabbed section marked Article 7, Aaron leaned forward. The chair made a polite squeak. Regarding specific cash bequests to family members, he paused, not theatrically, simply to find the line. "To my former spouse, Mrs. Yvonne Sullivan." Sienna's smile sharpened. Mark's pen hovered. A sound rose in my ears like wind through a vent. I pressed my fingers gently against the key in my pocket, the familiar circle of brass answering like a pulse that belonged to no one but me. The lawyer read, neutral and clear. I give and bequeath the sum of $15 in United States currency. A breath went out of the room, then laughter came in. Not loud, not kind, the kind you hear at private schools and private clubs, chuckles trimmed to the shape of cruelty. The catering attendant looked down at the tray as if the cookies had shamed her. The paralegal's hands froze above the keyboard, then resumed with a nervous rush. Aaron's smile spread slowly, a sunrise in reverse. He turned to face me fully, as if the line had been written for his mouth, rather than the page. "You get $15, Mom." Sienna laughed first, quick and bright. Mark followed, a low snort. A junior executive by the window shook his head as if sharing a harmless inside joke. I did not answer. I did not flinch. I placed my palm over the key. The circle of brass felt heavier, like an anchor you can hide inside a pocket. Grace did not move, did not blink. She simply watched the room, taking note of men who celebrate small victories they believe are large. Aaron sank back with the satisfaction of a case closed. "It's ceremonial," he told Sienna, loud enough for everyone. "Dad wanted her to have bus fare." Laughter again, briefer now, like sparks dying as they hit marble. The lawyer, neither smiled nor frowned. He waited for the sound to finish its pride. $15, he repeated, because the law prefers exactness to theatrics. To be paid in cash. He set that page aside as if it were a receipt. My breathing found a steady rhythm. Up, down, in, out. The kind of breathing you learn when you have carried other people's weight longer than your own. I looked at the clock. Its slender second hand moved with a confidence that belonged to no person here. The lawyer continued, naming accounts that would pass to the trust, naming objects that meant nothing to me and everything to the men who had hunted them. Aaron whispered to Mark about valuations. Sienna checked the face of her watch and gave a sympathetic pout, as if $15 were beneath even her disdain. Across the table, a young staffer dared a glance at me and then looked away quickly, as one looks from a painting that tells the truth too directly. My silence troubled him. Good. Silence should trouble people who mistake noise for evidence. The lawyer turned another page. Article 8, Disposition of the Residuary Estate. Aaron's posture grew taller, the way a sail finds wind. All remaining liquid assets controlling interests, real property, and associated holdings. His voice did not waver, but the air around his words tightened as if the room itself had drawn in its breath. Aaron smoothed his cuff and gave Sienna a smile rehearsed for magazine covers. She squeezed his arm, her diamond winked in the light like a lie that had learned to dance. Mark aligned his pen with military neatness and nodded at nothing. The lawyer kept reading, frameworks and clauses, numbers with many commas. His cadence stripped the glitter from the sums and left only arithmetic. That is what law does when it is practiced well. It takes champagne and turns it back into grapes. When the laughter about $15 had fully evaporated, the silence returned, dense and expectant. I could hear the ice settling in the carafe. I could hear my heart without hurry. I could hear the small scrape of Aaron's ring against the table as his fingers began a quiet drumbeat of possession. I thought of a boy stacking wooden blocks, certain they would never fall. I thought of a man handing me a pen and calling it a favor. I thought of a brass key opening a sea-foam door in a future we painted together before ambition invented its own weather. I did not think of revenge. I thought of gravity. The lawyer's eyes tracked the page. He reached for a glass of water. The ice clicked. The glass returned to the coaster with a sound that was almost ceremonial. He said my name once, then Aaron's, then returned to the grammar of residue and devise and bequeath. Sienna whispered, "Almost done," into Aaron's shoulder. He nodded, a king accepting tribute. Several people in the room glanced my way again, searching for a crack or a tremble or a plea. They looked for what they had. Been taught to expect from women who are told they are worth bus fare. I offered them a stillness they did not recognize. Grace's eyes met mine. She did not nod. She did not smile. She was a witness, not a cheerleader. That is what a mirror does. It reflects your outline when the room insists you are invisible. Aaron cleared his throat as if speeding the hour by will. "Counselor, can we move along?" he said, trying on authority that he considered his birthright. "We have a reservation." Laughter again, lighter. A crowd favoring the winner it assumes it knows. The lawyer did not look up. "In due course," he said. I pressed my palm to the key one last time and then let my hand rest open on the table. My fingers felt steady, my shoulders unbowed. Humiliation is only fatal when it is borrowed as truth. Across the glassy surface, Aaron's reflection floated like a second self. Broader, shinier, emptier. He smiled at his own outline. I watched the smile without entering it. The lawyer turned to the final subsection of Article 8. Paper shifted. Voices fell into a hush that tasted like metal. The room arranged itself around a sentence it had not yet heard. I did not pray. I listened. I breathed. I waited. My hand found the key again, and the key found me. The two of us aligned like hinge and door. The laughter was still fading when the lawyer stopped reading. His voice stilled, his eyes tracing the page as though something invisible had shifted the ink. A long silence followed, the kind that rearranges a room without sound. Then he reached into the folder beside him. "There is," he said carefully, "one additional document." Aaron looked up, impatient. "Another list of trinkets?" "No," the lawyer replied. This was delivered to the firm by an outside attorney, one Grace Whitaker, a few days before Mr. Sullivan's passing. It bears his signature and a dated notary seal. It is marked as a codicil to the original will. The word codicil drifted through the air like a spark in slow motion. Aaron frowned. "That's impossible. There's only one will. I oversaw it myself." The lawyer folded his hands. "Apparently, your father added something privately." Grace rose from her seat near the wall. Every head turned. She opened her leather portfolio with deliberate calm and withdrew a sealed envelope stamped with the firm's watermark. "This," she said, "is the original copy, witnessed and notarized. John Sullivan entrusted it to me directly." Aaron's voice hardened. "You were his lawyer?" "No," she said evenly. "I was his wife's neighbor, and his conscience, for about 15 minutes. A thin gasp crossed the room, part shock, part curiosity. The senior lawyer adjusted his glasses again. "Mrs. Whitaker, please confirm, this document was executed in accordance with legal requirements?" "Yes," she said, and Mr. Sullivan requested that it not be opened until after the first will had been read in full. Aaron laughed, but there was no ease in it now. A sentimental stunt. My father was dramatic toward the end. Grace said nothing. She simply handed the envelope to the lawyer, who broke the seal with a silver letter opener. The paper inside was thick, handwritten in blue ink. The lawyer cleared his throat and began. "To whom it may concern, if you are reading this, it means I have chosen to amend the record of my life. I am aware that my official will name my son, Aaron Sullivan, as the principal heir. However, truth requires an addendum." Aaron's chair creaked. Sienna's smile froze, half-formed. "I built Sullivan Properties on the shoulders of a woman whose name I once took for granted. Yvonne was there before the first foundation was poured, before the first check was written. She bore the weight of my ambition and the cost of my mistakes. 20 years ago, she shielded this company from ruin by taking legal responsibility for my decisions. That act saved my fortune and my reputation." The room began to breathe differently. Mark shifted in his seat. The paralegal stopped typing altogether. "Aaron, you were not yet ready to understand what integrity means. You saw your mother's silence as weakness, not strength. You measured worth in inheritance, not in sacrifice. I cannot change what has been said about her, but I can ensure that the truth has a witness." Aaron slammed a hand on the table. "Stop reading." The lawyer didn't even glance at him. His voice stayed level. "Therefore, I revoke any previous request in favor of my son, Aaron Sullivan, except the nominal sum of $15 to satisfy legal formality. The remainder of my estate, valued at approximately $160 million, is to be granted solely and irrevocably to my former spouse, Mrs. Yvonne Sullivan. The room froze. The air itself seemed to go pale. Aaron's mouth opened, but no sound came. Sienna blinked as though trying to compute the math of humiliation. Mark exhaled a small, astonished, "Jesus." The lawyer kept reading. Yvonne may choose to manage, sell, or dissolve any holdings as she deems fit. She owes no explanation to anyone. She has already paid more than enough. Grace folded her arms, eyes steady on Aaron. "Your father was very clear." Aaron shot to his feet. "This is fraud, He pointed at Grace. "You planted this." Grace didn't flinch. "Your father called me 3 days before he died. He said, 'I can't die knowing the wrong person will own what she built.' I told him it was late. He said, 'Late is better than never.'" Aaron turned on the lawyer. "You can't validate this. It contradicts the main document." The lawyer's tone was surgical. "Not if it is properly witnessed, notarized, and dated later than the original, which it is." He slid the paper forward so Aaron could see the signature. "Your father's handwriting. Verified." Aaron's voice cracked. He wasn't in his right mind. Grace spoke softly. "He was sober, calm, and more lucid than I'd ever seen him." The silence that followed was different this time, not heavy but wide. Everyone looked at me, waiting for my reaction, as if expecting tears or outrage or triumph. I offered them none. I kept my hand over the brass key, the metal now warm against my skin. I thought of John's voice, tired but gentle, the last time he called me Vonnie. I thought of the rain against the glass the night I signed my name to save him. I whispered, almost to myself, "He remembered." Grace's gaze softened. "He did." Aaron's face flushed red. "You can't do this to me!" The lawyer sighed, already weary of youth's disbelief. "Mr. Sullivan, your father did this to himself, to make peace." Aaron's fists clenched. "You think she deserves it? She destroyed our family." Grace stepped forward, voice firm. "No, she protected it when you and your father couldn't." Aaron turned to me then, eyes wild, the charm stripped away. "Say something, Mother. Tell them you don't want it." I looked at him, my son, my reflection twisted by years of neglect, and said quietly, "I already earned it." He stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. The lawyer continued with the closing paragraph. "To my son, I leave the lesson that a man's fortune means nothing if built on another's silence. To Yvonne, I leave everything else, including my apology." The lawyer set the pages down. The sound was small but final. Aaron's voice broke again, softer now, uncertain. "He apologized to you?" I nodded once. In his way. He backed away from the table, shaking his head. "No, he wouldn't. He loved me." Grace said gently, "He did, but he finally saw who you both were." The paralegal resumed typing, recording every word that would soon become official record. Sienna looked down, her hand sliding from Aaron's arm. Mark muttered an excuse and slipped out. The laughter from earlier had become a ghost in the corners of the room. Aaron stared at the lawyer. "I'll contest it." "You're free to try," the lawyer said, "but the assets have already been transferred to Mrs. Sullivan's trust, legally binding as of this morning." Grace closed her portfolio. "Your father planned it that way. He didn't want you undoing what he'd finally done right." Aaron's lips parted, but no words formed. For once, silence belonged to him. I stood, slow and steady. "We're done here," I said. The lawyer nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Sullivan, we are." I turned toward the door. My steps felt lighter than they had in decades. The marble floor reflected me. Not the woman they'd mocked, but the woman who had endured, who had outlived every dismissal. Behind me, I heard Aaron whisper, "She doesn't deserve it." Grace answered before I could. "No, Aaron. She deserved it long before your father died." As we reached the elevator, I slipped my hand into my coat pocket and felt the brass key once more. It was warm now, almost alive. For the first time, I wasn't holding on to the past. I was unlocking something new. The moment the lawyer declared the transfer complete, something in Aaron snapped. It was not dramatic at first, just a tightening in his jaw, a twitch in the vein along his temple, the kind of quiet tremor that comes before an earthquake. He stood there, frozen, as the reality settled in. The empire, the money, the power, all gone. His inheritance had dissolved into air, replaced by a name he could no longer control, mine. I could feel his stare on me before I saw it, heavy, unbelieving, like a child watching a trick he can't explain. Then the disbelief broke. "You did this," he shouted, his voice splintering in the air. "You manipulated him. You and that woman." He pointed at Grace, his finger shaking. "You poisoned him against me." Grace remained still. Her face didn't move, but her eyes had the sharp calm of someone who has seen this before. "Your father's words were his own, Aaron." "Liar," he yelled, the sound raw, almost animal-like. "He would never leave me with nothing." He turned back to me. "You wanted revenge. You pretended to be the victim all these years, but you've been waiting for this. Admit it." I stayed seated. My palms rested on my knees, my breathing even. "I don't need revenge, Aaron. I needed peace." That only seemed to inflame him more. "Peace? You call taking everything from me peace?" His voice cracked on the last word. The arrogance that had carried him his whole life was gone. What remained was panic, naked and desperate. He slammed both hands on the table. Papers jumped, glasses rattled. Sienna gasped. Mark whispered something to the guard near the door, but Aaron didn't hear. "I was supposed to lead this company." "Oh," he shouted. "I worked for this." Grace's voice cut in quietly. "No, Aaron. You inherited positions. You didn't build them." He spun toward her. "You don't know what I've done." "I know what your mother did," she said, "and that's enough." His face twisted. "You think she's some saint? She ruined everything. She made him miserable." I stood then, not out of anger, but out of a long, tired mercy. "Aaron." He stopped, panting, eyes wild. "You can hate me if you need to," I said softly, "but you will not raise your voice at me again." He laughed bitterly. "What, you think you're powerful now? Because you got lucky?" The guard stepped closer. "Mr. Sullivan, please." But Aaron wasn't listening. He came around the table, fast, his steps echoing against the marble, his hand curled into a fist, not quite raised, but not far from it. The guard caught him by the arm before he reached me. "Sir, don't." Aaron jerked, trying to pull free. "Let me go. She doesn't deserve to." "Stop." My voice was calm, but it filled the room. He froze. Maybe it was the tone. Maybe it was the fact that, for the first time, I wasn't afraid. "Con ka they get me," I said quietly, the Vietnamese words rising from somewhere deep and familiar. Then, in English, everyone could hear, "You can hate me, Aaron, but you will not be allowed to hurt me ever again." His breath came heavy, uneven. For a moment, the fury drained out of him, replaced by confusion, as if he was hearing my voice for the first time. Grace moved beside me, just in case. The lawyer stood, signaling the guards to hold their ground. Sienna whispered Aaron's name, her voice trembling, but he didn't look at her. He looked only at me. "You think this changes anything?" he said, quieter now, almost pleading. "You think money makes you better than me?" I shook my head. "It doesn't make me better. It just means I can finally live without begging to be seen." The words seemed to slice through whatever was left of his composure. His shoulders dropped, his chest heaved. He tried to speak again, but the sound came out as a dry gasp. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "You'll regret this." Grace stepped forward. "Careful, Aaron. Threats sound smaller when the law is listening." He looked at her, then at the lawyer, at the guards, at Sienna, who now stood a few feet away, clutching her purse like a lifeboat. The room that had once belonged to him no longer did. Finally, he turned to me one last time. "You destroyed me." I met his eyes, steady. "No, you destroyed yourself the day you forgot who raised you." He flinched, just slightly. Then the guard guided him toward the door. He didn't resist this time. He just walked, head down, steps uneven, the proud stride of John Sullivan's son reduced to something small, lost. As the door closed behind him, silence filled the space he left. No one moved. Even the clock seemed to pause. Grace exhaled. "You handled that perfectly." "I didn't handle it," I said. "It just ended." The lawyer nodded slowly. "He'll cool off. Pride takes longer to break than fortune." I looked at the table, papers, pens, and one glass still trembling from the echo of his rage. I touched the rim, steadying it. "Pride breaks itself," I said. Grace placed a hand on my shoulder. "Do you want to leave?" "Not yet." I walked toward the window. The city stretched below, steel, glass, ambition stacked on ambition. For years I had watched it from the outside. Now I stood above it, and all I felt was quiet. The reflection in the window showed a woman I barely recognized, older, yes, but unbroken. There were lines around my mouth from years of swallowing words, and a calm in my eyes that hadn't been there. Before, Aaron's shout still echoed faintly in my memory, but underneath it was something stronger, stillness. Grace joined me by the glass. "You're shaking," she said. "Not from fear," I replied. "From release." We stood there for a long moment, watching the light move across the skyline. The lawyer packed the documents, the paralegal closed her laptop, and the staff began to clear the room. Life continued, indifferent and efficient. When I finally turned away from the window, I felt the brass key shift in my pocket, pressing gently against my palm. I smiled at the small weight of it. "Let's go home," I said. Grace nodded. "Home," she echoed. As we walked out, the sound of my heels against the marble no longer felt out of place. Each step was measured, certain. Behind us, Aaron's voice no longer reached. Only the faint hum of the city remained, a sound too far away to wound me anymore. The morning after the will reading, I woke to the sound of gulls. Their cries came sharp and clean through the open window, cutting through the remnants of dreams that still smelled faintly of marble and paper. The sea outside was gray again, calm, endless. The world, despite everything, had gone on. Grace was already at the kitchen table, her hair pulled back, glasses low on her nose, a stack of documents neatly arranged beside a cup of black coffee. She looked up when I walked in. "You didn't sleep much," she said. "I don't remember the last time I did," I replied, pouring tea. "What's all this?" She gestured toward the papers. "These are the transfer forms, the trust, the shares, the properties. Technically, as of midnight, you own all of it." The words hung in the air, heavy and almost absurd. You own all of it. For years I had been invisible. No voice, no title, no stake. Now, by the strange symmetry of fate, everything that had erased me belonged to me. I sat down. "And what happens if I don't want to own it?" Grace smiled faintly. "Then you make a choice. Ownership is only a burden if you carry it yourself." I looked at the papers, with my name printed neatly across every page. Yvonne Sullivan, sole beneficiary. The letters looked foreign, like a language I'd learned long ago but forgotten how to speak. "I don't want it," I said finally. She leaned back. "That's what I thought you'd say." I sipped my tea. It was lukewarm, but steady. John built that company with hunger. Aaron wanted it for pride. I won't repeat either mistake. I'm too old for empires. Grace nodded. "Then we'll set up a power of attorney. I can appoint an executive board to handle operations. You can step away entirely." "Do it," I said. "Give the employees raises. Fund the scholarship programs John ignored. Keep the rest running if it must. But I don't want to see balance sheets or reports." She hesitated. "You could make billions more, you know." I smiled. "Grace, I've already paid enough for every dollar in that account. Let it earn peace instead." For the next hour, she drafted the authorization. The pen moved quickly across the pages, the legal rhythm of liberation. When she finished, she handed me the final sheet. "Sign here," she said. "This gives me full authority to oversee the estate." I took the pen. It was the same brand the firm had used yesterday. Heavy, expensive, unnecessary. My hand trembled once, not from doubt but from the strange gravity of letting go. I signed. The ink dried instantly. I felt lighter than I had in decades. Grace studied my face. "Do you feel relieved?" "More than that," I said. "I feel untied." She nodded and slipped the paper into her folder. "I'll take it from here. And you? What will you do now?" I looked toward the window at the stretch of ocean folding into the horizon. "I'll stay here. Maybe repaint the porch, fix the garden fence, read again." Grace smiled. "A quiet rebellion." "A necessary one," I said. After she left for the city, I walked down to the shoreline. The sand was cool beneath my shoes. The tide whispered like an old friend returning. I stood there for a long while, watching the gulls circle, thinking about all the years I had lived for other people's ambitions. The brass key sat in my pocket, warm against my thigh. I took it out, holding it between my fingers. The edges had dulled over time, but the shape was still perfect. It had opened every door I'd ever loved, and every one that closed behind me. I thought of the house it once belonged to, the sea foam walls, the laughter echoing through rooms that no longer existed, the boy with ink on his hands and dreams in his eyes, the man who promised forever and forgot halfway through. "Thank you," I whispered, not to them, but to the years that had carved me into something quiet and unbreakable. Back at the cottage, I made a small dinner. Bread, soup, and a slice of lemon cake Grace had left behind. I ate slowly, savoring the ordinary. For the first time, the silence around me didn't feel empty. It felt earned. That night, I wrote a letter to Aaron. I didn't know if I would ever send it. "My son, there is nothing left between us that money can fix. I wish you peace, the kind that comes from seeing yourself clearly. When you do, you'll understand that this inheritance was never punishment. It was the truth. I loved you the best way I knew how. I hope one day you will forgive the silence that saved you." I folded it, sealed it, and placed it in a drawer beside the brass key. Both belonged to the past now, but both deserved a home. The following morning, Grace called to confirm the paperwork had been processed. "It's done," she said. "You're officially free." Free. The word tasted almost strange. After the call, I opened the windows wide. The ocean breeze swept through, carrying salt and sunlight. Curtains fluttered. The world was new, though it looked the same. I brewed tea and sat on the porch, the cup warm in my hands. The sky stretched wide and forgiving. Somewhere beyond the dunes, children's laughter rose from the beach, a sound of beginnings. I closed my eyes and breathed. For so many years, I had tried to earn love by being small, quiet, and useful. Now I understand that sometimes the truest strength is not in fighting, but in refusing to keep carrying what no longer belongs to you. The world would remember me as the woman who inherited an empire, but I would remember myself as the woman who walked away from one. As the sun dipped low, the brass key caught the last light of the day and glowed faintly in my palm. I pressed it into the wood of the porch rail and left it there, a quiet monument to everything I had survived. I didn't need to unlock anything anymore. Freedom, I realized, isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like a woman sitting alone at dusk, tea cooling beside her, smiling at nothing in particular. And for the first time, being unseen didn't hurt at all. A month after signing everything away, I drove north. The road was familiar in the way a half-forgotten song is. You remember the rhythm before the words. Gray fields stretched on either side, and the winter light fell soft over everything, as if time itself had grown tired of harshness. I hadn't been back to Elm Street in 20 years. The navigation voice said the name like it belonged to someone else's memory. When I turned the corner, I almost didn't recognize the house. The paint had faded to the color of sea mist, the porch sagged a little, and vines had climbed over the fence like uninvited guests. But the shape, the bones of it, were still the same. I parked in front and sat for a long time, watching the curtains stir in the windows. I half expected a stranger to walk out to tell me I had the wrong place, but no one came. The house waited, patient and quiet. I stepped out of the car and the air smelled of rain and soil. My shoes crunched on the gravel path John once laid himself. I ran my fingers along the wooden rail he built the summer Aaron turned 6. Every nail, every splinter felt like an old photograph made solid. At the door, my hand trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. The brass key rested in my palm, dull from decades of being carried, rubbed smooth by waiting. I turned it once, twice, unsure if it would even fit anymore. But it slid in as if it had been waiting, too. The lock clicked. When I pushed the door open, light spilled across the floorboards. The air inside was stale yet familiar, the scent of pine cleaner, faint paint, and something sweet I couldn't name. Dust shimmered in the sunbeams like suspended memories. I stood in the doorway, the same spot where John once carried me across the threshold, laughing about bad luck and old traditions. The same spot where Aaron took his first steps. The same spot where I had stood years later, holding a suitcase, not knowing I was walking into silence that would last decades. Now, the silence was mine, and it was beautiful. I walked slowly through each room. The living room still had the outline of the old couch on the wall. The kitchen window still looked out to the maple tree that used to drop its leaves like confetti every autumn. The floor creaked in the same places it always did, complaining softly, like an old friend teasing me for staying away so long. In the corner of the dining room, I saw a small mark on the wall, a pencil line labeled Aaron, age 8. I traced it with my finger. For a moment, I could almost hear his laughter again, echoing from somewhere deep in the house. Tears came quietly, not from grief anymore, but from the strange peace of knowing that even pain can turn gentle if you stop feeding it. I sat by the window, watching light fall across the floor, and whispered, "I'm home." The words felt fragile at first, then steady. That night, I built a fire in the old hearth. It took a few tries. The wood was damp, and I had forgotten the rhythm of coaxing flame from stubborn logs. But when it finally caught, warmth spread through the room like forgiveness. I made tea, using an old tin kettle I found in a box. Its handle was rusted, its whistle cracked, but the sound it made was the sweetest thing I'd heard in years. I sat in front of the fire, holding the cup close, feeling the steam on my face. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the windows. The house creaked and sighed, but it felt alive again, like a body remembering how to breathe. Later, I walked upstairs to what used to be our bedroom. The walls were bare now, but when the moonlight poured through the curtains, it painted the same soft lines across the floorboards where John and I once danced on a quiet night, barefoot and young. I smiled. The memory didn't hurt anymore. It was simply part of the story. On the nightstand sat an old glass jar, cloudy with dust. Inside was a handful of seashells Aaron had collected when he was little. I lifted one, turning it over in my palm, and listened to the faint echo inside. The ocean, or maybe just imagination. It didn't matter. It sounded like life. The next morning, I unlocked the back door and stepped into the garden. The bench John built was still there, though the paint had peeled away. I sat on it anyway, brushing away leaves. The sun was rising behind the house, flooding everything in gold. The brass key hung from my hand, heavy and warm in the light. I thought about throwing it into the sea, but something in me hesitated. Not because I needed it, but because it deserved to stay. It had survived every door, every season, every silence. It was the last witness. I looked up at the sky and whispered the words that had been forming inside me since the day of the will reading. I spent 20 years believing I had lost everything. But maybe loss was just life's way of clearing space for something honest. The wind moved through the trees, a soft applause. I stood, walked to the porch, and hung the key by the doorframe on a small rusted hook. The morning light caught it, and for a moment it gleamed, like the beginning of a story, not the end. I took one last look at the house, and a thought settled gently inside me. You cannot rewrite the past, but you can choose the page where it stops hurting. As I turned to leave, I whispered to the empty rooms, half a prayer, half a truth. It took me 20 years to understand. Not everyone you give life to has the right to walk through it forever. The words floated in the still air, tender but firm. They didn't need an answer. When I closed the door, sunlight spilled across the threshold again, stretching toward me like forgiveness itself. I walked down the path to the car, breathing in the salt air, the damp earth, the clean scent of morning. Behind me, the house stood quiet but awake, its windows catching the light. For once, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I was simply moving towards something that had been waiting all along, myself. And as I drove away, the road unrolled before me like a second chance.